The First Battle of the Marne took place from September 6th to September 12th, 1914. The German army had already invaded Belgium and northeastern France and had already reached within 30 miles of Paris. Their progress had been rapid, having successfully beaten back Belgian, French, and British forces while advancing deep into northeastern France. In anticipation of a German attack, the French government appointed 65-year-old General Joseph-Simon Gallieni as military governor of Paris. He did not want to sit back and wait for invasion. In the first days of September, he convinced the French commander-in-chief, Joseph Joffre, to spare him an army, which was General Michael Joseph Minory's Sixth Army, in order to defend Paris. Meanwhile, General Alexander von Kluck, at the head of the German First Army, was disobeying orders from his own leaders to double back and support the German Second Army in order to protect itself from possible attacks from the French on its right flank from the direction of Paris. However, he still ordered his troops to follow the retreating French across the Marne River, which they crossed on September 3rd. On September 4th, Helmuth von Moltke, chief of the German General Staff, learned that Kluck had disobeyed orders, and had learned that Kluck's troops were exhausted and depleted of resources, which they had all used up during their rapid advance. He also learned that Kluck's army had already crossed the Marne. He feared attacks from Paris, and ordered the First and Second Armies to try and stop any threats coming from that direction. However, the order was too late, as the French were already prepared with their Fifth and Sixth Armies, as well as with help from the BEF, or the British Expeditionary Force. Gallieni saw his opportunity and ordered an attack on the right flank of the German First Army. On September 6, 1914, the French Sixth Army of 150,000, under the command of General Michael Joseph Minory, attacked the Germans. The French caught the Germans off guard. Over the next few days, the French and the BEF were able to push the German army backwards to where entrenchment of positions would occur all the way up to 1918. After 4 years of fighting at the Marne in the coming years, however, both armies were exactly where they had started, just with more casualties. The French suffered 250,000 losses in this battle, and it is believed that the Germans suffered similar casualties. The British recorded 12,733 casualties in the BEF. The French succeeded in throwing back the German offensive and recaptured lost ground in the process. The battle also ended the belief that the Germans would end fighting on the Western Front quickly. Most importantly, the First Battle of the Marne showed that the war would go on, and all nations involved were involved in a trap that they could not escape. After the German advance through Belgium and eastern France was ended by an Allied victory in the Battle of the Marne in late September 1914, the race to the sea began. Each army tried to outflank the other on their way north. By October 1914, the Allies had reached Nieuport on the North Sea coast. The Germans reached and captured Antwerp and forced its Belgian and BEF defenders back to Nieuport near Ypres. The BEF and Belgian forces arrived at Ypres and reinforced their defenses there between October 8th and 19th. Meanwhile, the Germans prepared to launch their attack toward the Allied lines in order to capture Ypres and other channel ports, therefore controlling the outlets to the North Sea. On October 19th, the Germans launched their attack. The Allies resisted and both sides traded blows. The fighting continued until the winter, where some of the war's most brutal moments were seen. The fighting in Belgium continued with the Second Battle of Ypres. On April 22, 1915, the Germans launched their first and only offensive of the year. The attack began with the usual artillery bombardment of the Allied line. When the fighting died down, the Allied defenders waited for the first wave of German attack troops. However, The French were shocked when canisters of chlorine gas were thrown, which floated down into their trenches. The Germans targeted 4 miles of the front with the wind-blown poison gas, killing 2 divisions of French troops. However, the Germans failed to take full advantage of the effects of the poison gas, and the Allies managed to hold on to most of their positions. A second gas attack on April 24th pushed the Allies further back, and by May they had retreated all the way back to the town of Ypres. The Germans had won this battle, however, it was an insignificant gain. The Third Battle of Ypres featured a change of events, with the Allied forces attacking the Germans this time, led by British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig. The focus of this attack was to destroy German submarine bases at the north end of Belgium. 9 British divisions and 6 French divisions advanced on the German lines near the Belgian village of Passchendaele on July 31st, 1917. The Allied forces suffered heavy casualties but made large advances, capturing German soldiers along the way. Haig continued to persistently push forward, even through the awful weather conditions in August, which even had some men drown in liquid mud. Even though the Allied troops were tired and had only small gains after 3 months, Haig continued to press on. Finally, on November 6, 1917, British and Canadian forces captured the village of Passchendaele. Haig finally called off the offensive, but this victory cost the British 310,000 troops.
The Battle of Verdun was between the French and Germans. It was also the longest single battle of World War I, starting February 21st, 1916, and ending December 16th, 1916. In order to win the battle, the Germans made a plan. This plan was called the Schlieffen Plan, and its goal was to kill as many French people as possible so the Germans could go on to fighting the Russians. The Germans believed that the quickest way to defeat the French was to take away their resources, such as food and weapons. The Germans were better prepared for the battle. They had more soldiers, better training, and better weapons. With this said, the Germans were very confident that they would win the battle. In the beginning of the battle, the Germans blocked off the French railroad to Paris. However, a little later on, French regained the railroad and fought back. One invention this battle was responsible for was the railway gun. This machinery was used to crush forts and shoot heavy explosives. Later in the battle, Germans lost their forts and could no longer fight. With this said, the French won the Battle of Verdun.
After 2 years of trench warfare, the allies of France and Britain attempt to break through German lines. The Battle of Somme started on July 1st, 1916, and ended November 18th, 1918. It was one of the largest battles of World War I. It was also one of the bloodiest. Even if the British did have one of their best offensive battles, they still lost 57 men just on the first day of battle. But altogether, the Allies and Central Powers would lose more than 1.5 million men. The war was France and Britain against Germany. This battle took place on the Western Front near the Somme River. The French commander-in-chief, Joffre, convinced the idea to drain the forces of Germany. The plan was arranged and then agreed by Sir Douglas Haig. Sir Douglas and Joffre intended the attack to be a France offensive attack, but the changes on site at Verdun at the start of 1916 changed all of that when the British was more of an offensive attack. One of the main key parts of this battle were their artillery and tactics. They fired 1.7 million shells, and a number of them failed to explode, affecting their range of where they wanted to be against Germany. They thought they would be able to have more men down and machine down and ruin a lot of their camp setup sites. The German army did end up to weaken over time, but the French and British tactics did get stronger, which helped them throughout this battle. Many troops were killed or wounded the moment they stepped foot onto this battlefield. The hardest part for France and Britain was that they didn't have the high-tech weapons that Germany did. Germany had machine guns, which were able to kill faster and were able to reload quicker than what the British and France had. I guess you could say that neither side really won. The British and France won some land, but it wasn't much. The whole point of this war was to take some of the pressure off French troops who were fighting the Germans at Verdun, and also to make a breakthrough on German lines.
The Battle of Cambrai began on November 20th, 1917. This battle would be the second time tanks were used in World War I, but were used much more effectively than the first. This was a risky move by the British after the terrible failure of tanks at the Battle of Somme. Taking Cambrai would be a key victory for the Allies in winning World War I. This meant that the outcome of this battle could not solely be relied on tanks. The offensive push by the British was a mix of 400 tanks, artillery, and infantry. The city of Cambrai was surrounded by a very strong German defensive position called the Hindenburg Line. The Hindenburg Line was so strong because of the barbed wire that surrounded the whole city before it, and then behind the barbed wire were two lines of German infantry and artillery. But like all strong defenses, there is always a weak spot. The Hindenburg Line's weak spot was the back of the city. This is where the British offensive began. The battle began as a surprise attack on the Germans and was extremely effective. Tanks plowed through wave after wave of barbed wire and German infantry on the flat outskirts of Cambrai. With the assistance of infantry, artillery, and the element of surprise, the Germans stood almost no chance in the beginning of the battle. By the end of the first day of the battle, the British had gained 4 to 5 miles on Cambrai and had captured 8 to 10,000 prisoners. Unfortunately, though, for every positive the British had gained, there was a negative to match it. The St. Quentin Canal had been blocked off by a British tank that had been destroyed during the battle. This canal was a vital point for tanks and infantry entering the fight, and with it blocked off, the British were not nearly as effective in their next 2 days of fighting. Another negative that they had after only the first day of battle was that many infantry units had broken off from the chain of command, which made it very difficult for the British to organize attacks. These negatives will prove too much for the British to handle in the next few days. By November 30th, the German counterattack was ready, and the British were nowhere near prepared for it. The counterattack by the Germans was so effective that within 4 days they had gained all the land that they had lost, and on December 3rd, Commander Haig gave the order for the British to retreat. The total fatalities for the British were around 44,000, and the total losses for the Germans was around 45,000. Britain may have lost, but they learned the most effective way to use tanks. They should only be used in mass effect while supported by infantry and are mobile only on flat landscapes. All of these factors were present during this battle, which led to the first great success of tanks.